I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, an inquiry finds special needs children are being turned away from local schools. Universities and trigger warnings. Do they protect students or shield them from the realities of life? And as South East Queensland gets a post-cyclone drenching, politicians band together to offer support. Joining me on the panel, David Roy from the University of Newcastle. Thanks for driving down to us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Jack Boyd, who is the National President of Australian Young Labour. Are you indeed? Is this your first time on the drum?
Yes, first time on the drum. Very excited to be here.
Thanks very much for coming in. And in Melbourne, postdoctoral fellow at RMIT University, Chris Berg. G'day, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum and on Facebook, where we're live streaming right now. There are signs of widespread civil disobedience by New South Wales public school principals who are routinely refusing to enrol children with special needs into mainstream classes. According to a family survey by the New South Wales Auditor-General, 1 in 4 respondents said school staff had told them there was no place for their child at the local school, which is illegal. The matter came up at a groundbreaking inquiry into special education, which began this week before the New South Wales Upper House, where a representative of the Education Department couldn't say how many students have been turned away.
How widespread do you think the problem is?
I think that's difficult to tell, but we do also know from some parent support groups who talk to us about the fact that some parents are reluctant to bring a complaint to the departments.
A group of parents gave evidence suggesting the percentage of children denied a place is actually much higher than 25%. But parents don't complain for fear the child will face further discrimination, saying just getting their child enrolled is hard enough.
8 separate attempts that you made?
I did. I went to many schools. I went to private schools. I went to public schools. I explored Catholic schools. And I guess one of my recommendations is that parents shouldn't have to do that, and there should be an easier way for parents to be able to assess which is the right school for them.
As parents, we're being told to send our children to support units because at least they might understand autism. So I think it's very disappointing that I don't seem to have a choice because I'm being told that mainstream schools won't understand my child, so send him to a segregated unit.
The problem we have is schools are looking at children as a deficit medical model rather than the asset.
Well, that is in fact you, David, giving evidence there, and you've been a driving force behind this inquiry. You're an academic specialising in education, a long-term teacher and an advocate for special needs kids or kids with special needs. What do these parents say happens when they knock on the door of the local public school?
That the school cannot make reasonable adjustments.
What does that mean?
It's unreasonable. They say it will cost too much, it's too difficult for their child. That can happen when it's a physical disability. More often than not, it's when it's a neurological disability, when something like dyspraxia or autism. They just go, it's too difficult, we can't take you, we need to put you into a special unit instead. And even then, parents have to fight to get into those special units. Okay, so I mean, people at home are, people are reluctant to say, well, hang on. They think, well, what if this kid has a significant intellectual disability? Is that what you're really talking about? Isn't it reasonable for a public school to say, well, that can't work? People don't like to say it out loud, but that's what they think. But it's not the case. It's not that they have a significant intellectual disability where they can't cope with the curriculum. It's sometimes that they just have areas of communication challenge that many kids who don't have a diagnosis, don't have a medical label upon them, also have these challenges. These are kids we're talking about. I think we should maybe stop thinking so much about the label and realising these are the children of Australia and they're being denied the basic human right of an education. Many of the parents are left with no option because if the public school closes its door, where do they go? They don't have the financial resources to go independent. If those schools will accept them, which quite often they won't, And what do they have to do? They homeschool, which means that the parent is taken out of the economic wealth of Australia as well.
But there'll be people watching at home who say, this can't be true. I've spoken to public education advocates who say, this can't be happening, this can't be true, it can't be that widespread.
It is. Survey after survey has come out saying it's at least 1 in 4. When you look at the submissions to the inquiry, if you look at the first 20 submissions, there were 8 parental submissions. 4 of them stated denied. The 3 parents who were at that inquiry, all their kids were denied entry. And yet the Department of Education sat there saying, no one gets denied entry. The Principals Association sat there and said, no one gets denied entry. Well, that's just unrealistic, because they are.
Jack, this is dinner table conversation for you, isn't it? I mean, you grew up with 2 parents in the Catholic system. We've decided at 24 you're the closest to having spent time in the education system. Did this kind of apartheid between neurotypical kids, if you will, and kids who might have a special need exist 10 years ago when you were at school? Les?
Well, not in my experience. So when I was actually in primary school, we had a young man with Down syndrome in the year above me. He was integrated fully into the class. He went out and played with everybody on the playground, hung out with kids after school. And it was a really valuable addition to our school life, because when kids would throw around the insults that they do, throwing names about, you'd go, well, actually, I knew, and I won't say his name, but I knew this guy, and he was a lovely bloke. He interacted well with everybody. He's not those nasty things that people say. He's an average guy who's got some problems when it comes to learning. But I see him on the train, dressed in a suit, going into the city to go to work. Like this, he's a true success story of what the system is. And that happens for a lot of other people. And we can't just have this approach of, oh, it's too difficult, costs a bit of money. Like, we have to make the effort, because this is the best case and the best way that we should be going about integrating people with special needs and disabilities into the education system.
Chris, we were speaking earlier, if we were to be really candid about what parents of neurotypical children fear, what do they fear about having a child with special learning needs sitting beside their child in the classroom, do you think?
Look, I mean, I can't speak on personal, my kids aren't at school yet, but I suspect they're concerned, and the evidence seems to suggest that they're concerned that the teachers might be distracted, that the child might be a distraction for the class as well. But I think ultimately the evidence that we've seen today shows that there's very clearly a policy failure here, that the schools don't seem to see the benefit of having special needs kids who can be included in classes, in those classes, and parents don't feel that the schools are capable of doing that as well. I think it's very clear from what we've seen that there's a really substantial policy problem. We need to get to a situation where it is seen as a benefit for those kids that can be included in mainstream schools to be included in mainstream schools for the betterment of them and the schools themselves.
And if we were to be really fair dinkum about, there might be a lot of parents who'd actually say that out loud, but might actually think in their hearts, and they wouldn't be unreasonable people, I'm sure, in their daily dealings, and they would think, you know, as one parent put it to me, I want my kid to pass a selective schools test because I want him to be dragged up, or her to be dragged up, by that cohort. The implication being, the fear is that they will be dragged down by a kid with special needs.
No doubt that some parents would have some instinctual belief about that. We're not talking about, as I understand, we're not talking about a cohort of kids, of course. We're only talking about small numbers of special needs class special needs students in mainstream classes. But you can understand the way that some parents would feel about that. The problem that policymakers have to face is ensuring that the schools are supported and the parents understand that that having children with special needs in mainstream classes does not mean disruption, does not mean negative things for all the other kids.
And I mean, we're taking the risk of speaking candidly about these issues.
On television,
yeah.
Which is exactly where I speak most candidly.
Well, we all are, I hope. Jack is as well, and David as well. So if we've got these issues, somewhat ugly issues out of, like, I don't want my kid learning beside your kid, or whatever it might be, what's wrong with the segregation unit? What's wrong with segregating children into a separate area?
Well, it damages society, but more importantly, it actually damages the learning of the other children. If you have a child beside you who actually has an asset in an area, then you will benefit the other children. We're labelling children saying, oh, they have a disability, therefore they're obviously dumb. Sorry, that is not the case. So I presume most parents wouldn't want Einstein beside them in the classroom because he had a disability, a neurological disability. In fact, if we look at the most successful people in many areas of our society, the arts and in business, many of them have got a diagnosed disability, and it is because of that disability that they have thrived and succeeded and led others with them.
But again, what is wrong with a well-resourced support unit? Well, I mean, you gave some evidence about what you say happens in support units.
Because they're not being taught in those support units. There's some schools that do a good job, but it's not in the support units generally. What is going on in those support units is that we're putting them in cages, basically glorified wooden cages for multiple kids. We're isolating them from society, which creates ignorance in the rest of the society to the minority grouping, and that creates barriers down the line when it comes to adults being fully integrated into society. It's actually a negative impact for all children and for all adults.
Does abuse happen there?
Oh, yeah. Abuse is more likely to happen behind closed doors. In fact, children with disabilities are, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's around about 10% more likely to be physically or sexually abused because of their disability than other children.
I'm talking about in the support unit and the evidence you gave about what happens in some support units sometimes. What do you say happens?
In the support units and in the mainstream classroom, we have anecdotal and alleged incidents that have been put to the inquiry of children being dragged across floors with their face being cut open, slammed into walls, their arms twisted, locked in small cupboards and cages, unsupervised, all these areas going on. It is actions that if it was in the street, if it was in public, people would be arrested. But currently, it tends to be that schools will investigate themselves, and I see a real similarity between this and what's been happening with the Royal Commission and, say, churches investigating themselves.
Chris, so far the New South Wales Teachers Federation hasn't put out a statement about the evidence that was given on Monday to this inquiry, and I haven't heard very many advocates for public education speaking out loud and strong about it. I might have missed them, but why is there this silence around this issue?
Look, I imagine they're very torn in a lot of ways. I suspect that there are teachers on both sides of this question, teachers who support more inclusion and teachers who are concerned that the inclusion program is being counterproductive for some students. But of course the teachers union represents the teachers, doesn't necessarily represent the students, and certainly doesn't necessarily represent students with special needs. So regardless of, the teachers are an important voice, in fact an incredibly important voice into the way students with special needs are managed or helped or taught in classrooms. Yeah. But having said that, you know, they're certainly not the end all, and they will be expected to stand up primarily for teachers rather than students.
Quick final word on that, Tony.
I just want to say these are children. I don't think we should be saying all children are equal, but some are more equal than others. I think all children have the right to an education, and that's a teacher's job. It's difficult to teach all diverse learners with a label or not.
Well, if we're really honest about it, how ingrained is the discrimination against Australians with an intellectual disability? On the comedy circuit, in the playground, Australians still routinely reach for the words retard and spaz. And when Mark Latham was reaching for the worst insult he could think of to describe the ABC, he said it was a sheltered workshop. Yesterday, his employer Sky News said enough was enough.
Sky News has ended the contract of contributor Mark Latham. This follows, a number of controversies in relation to his comments around Christina Keneally, Wendy Harmer, and indeed in relation to some Sydney boys high school students and a video they recorded for International Women's Day.
Okay, so we should just decode that. Christina Keneally, who was the Premier of New South Wales, he called her the girl of a corrupt politician. He said that Wendy Harmer was a disabled person working in a sheltered workshop, and the Sydney boys who put out a video talking about the importance of feminism, they looked gay. How do you stay an idealistic young Labor Party person when this bloke was a prospective Prime Minister?
Well, 2004 was a long time before I was a member of the party. I was actually still in primary school when the 2004 election went ahead, so I'm proud to say I was never part of the party when Mark was at the helm. And look, there's no way that anybody could defend these comments. They're disgusting. I'm glad to see that he's been sacked by Sky because they're completely inappropriate. And this idea that in the 21st century you can come out and speak that way to people is completely inappropriate. And we have to stand up to people who use that type of language and call them out on it and say, like, enough is enough. You can't allow this to go on. Call him out, sack him, get him derided in the media like he's being at the moment, because that's what he deserves and that's what these comments deserve.
We were speaking before about fear and greed works. I mean, to what extent is this the model devised by the founder of Murdoch's US right-wing Fox News, Roger Ailes? So you run straight news by day and these sort of incendiary partisans at night, and that they get more and more outrageous as the witching hour progresses. Does this sell? I mean, is this what people want to see on television? The Real Housewives of Sydney and Mark Latham being as offensive as he can be?
Well, this is a problem. I think that increasingly, and we're lucky in Australia, it hasn't got to the point of the US, but this increasing level of vitriol is something that seems to be fueled particularly in commercial media, getting people at each other's throats, attacking, being the person who gets the headline. Like, Sky would have been laughing until they had to sack him because he was running on every other channel. This thing of, like, the viciousness and the vitriol sells, so people have an incentive to keep fueling it.
Chris, anger seems to be his defining characteristic, doesn't it? You can tell what are going to be we'll talk about trigger warnings in a minute. You can tell the triggers that are going to be there for Mark Latham. To what extent are those sorts of triggers, whether they're, women are tokens or Muslims are tokens, infected the sort of conservative discourse in a way that's damaging to the conservative tradition?
Look, Mark Latham has never been a representative of the conservative tradition, happily, and I'm not convinced that railing against political correctness by itself makes you a conservative. I think it... But
he sits beside people who call themselves conservatives and they all, chug along together, don't they?
Yeah, sure. I know a lot of conservatives, and I can tell you that banging on about political correctness does not a conservative make. It doesn't mean that you are conservative just because you think that we should be, or you think that you want to be able to say more rude things about more minority groups and so forth. That's not the inherent idea behind conservatism, and it's certainly not the liberal conservatism that animates so much of Australian public policy today. I think that Mark Latham, I think that Sky probably made the right decision here. He was
Probably? What else could he possibly have said that make it? That definitely. Now, definitely he's out.
You caught me on a terrible head. No, I think that Sky made the right decision. You can't just use a media platform to just throw abuse. It's not good television.
Okay, sheltered workshop. It's interesting, isn't it, that he reaches for the worst thing he can say, and lots of people in Australia, don't they, still reach for retard, as if having an intellectual disability and using that terrible word is the worst thing you could say about something. Is there a clue there?
It demonstrates his ignorance, I think. I think it's quite sad. I don't really want to give him too much air. Okay. I think Sky gave him enough. They knew what they were getting when they took him on. I don't know why they're so surprised at what he's done. He has a right to say what he wants. And under 18C changes, he might have an even bigger right to say what he wants. But to be honest, he's not important to my life. I just think it's really quite sad and says more about him.
Well, let's move on then. Well, are we too willing to take offence? There are moves in Australia for university students to be warned that the information they're about to hear could cause them distress. American universities have been implementing so-called trigger warnings in courses, and this year Monash University became the first Australian institution to follow suit. Should there be a warning that, in the novel Mrs. Dalloway, there will be references to suicide, that law courses will discuss rape cases, that history courses will tackle racism? Here's an extract from 7:30 earlier this week.
This will allow students who do have a response, whether that be an anxiety attack or a panic attack, based on any previous traumatic experiences, to be able to prepare themselves and take responsibility for their studies, manage any of those responses.
Critics say it all undermines intellectual freedom by labelling what ideas are and aren't acceptable.
My fear, if we go down the track of vetting courses and vetting course material, is that we are handing over a lot of power to people who can make decisions to censor your course material, and what they're doing then is censoring the truth.
Ika Willis has been using trigger warnings for the best part of a decade and sees no problems with the Monash approach.
The problem with trigger warnings is not that they close down discussion. They're absolutely designed to engage people in discussion and engage the full range of our students in discussion in ways that they might not be able to if they're blindsided, if they're taken by surprise.
Chris, is that reasonable that students should be given trigger warnings?
It depends what you mean by trigger warning. So I have no problem with, and I think it is good that teachers and lecturers will let people know that certain content might be disturbing, certain content might have themes that people find concerning, and so forth. What we're talking about with trigger warnings, though, is a couple of steps above that. It's suggesting that students will be triggered. They will be unable to cope with the material if they, unless they are warned about it. That's a big step, and that's a big psychological claim. It's a big psychological claim.
I mean, genuinely, I don't quite get this debate. I've been trying on all day. I've been trying to understand it, but I've had a lot on my plate. What's the distinction between saying, well, you know, we're about to discuss this, it's a rape case, just, you know, heads up. If you've had any personal experience around this, this might be a bit confronting, and on we move. Is there something else we're talking about that is somehow stifling of education? What is it?
So there's two parts to that. So we are talking about something more than just this is a disturbing discussion that we're about to have. We're talking about formal warnings in the case of Monash University. We're talking about a centralised system whereby they go through the curriculum and ensure and look for possible triggers within that curriculum and so forth. It's not left entirely up to the lecturers themselves. And the issue is not so much right now that this is going to have some really substantial impact on academic freedom or the learning. It's what we are now seeing happen through the United States, which is we are heading down a path that ends up or seems to end up in a really strong culture of campus censorship, a really strong culture of preventing discussion about certain controversial areas rather than encouraging discussion of that. So trigger warnings are a leading indicator of a problem coming down the line. I don't think anybody says they're a massive crisis that Australia all needs to tackle right now.
David, you're nodding away.
Yeah, listen, in my courses, I warn my students that in this lesson I'm going to teach about identifying abuse that you're seeing in children and how to deal with reporting that. And I give them warning because it can technically trigger certain students who've had experiences within their family. But there's a real danger when students are then starting to police the courses. Knowledge should be about expanding minds. It should be challenged. Students, if they don't want to know about these things, don't do the course, don't go to university, wrap yourself up in cotton wool and join the Scientologists.
Do you say that?
I've actually told students to say, if you don't want to know about this, stop wanting to be a teacher, go somewhere else.
Okay. Jack, you're at university. You're at the University of Wollongong, which was featured in that story where one of the lecturers was saying she's been giving trigger warnings for years. Have you had an experience of it?
I've never had an experience on it personally. I've had something similar though. When I was doing criminal law, when we approached topics around sexual assault, our lecturer and tutor would come out and say, like, hey guys, this is something we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking pretty in depth to some of these cases. Heads up, there's some confronting material in here. And that lets everybody know. But I think when you look at what's happening in Monash with the pilot and in cases in the UK as well, where they're warning specifically on different topics that are coming up, it's like if you're taking a human rights subject and you need somebody to tell you in advance that there's going to be talk of genocide or sexual assault, it's like this is something that you would expect by going into that sort of arena. So I do think it does have a place, but you won't catch me doing this too often, agreeing with the IPA on things, but I do think it's worrying on where it goes down the line, because in the States they have built more of a culture of censorship around the issue.
Isn't the difference here that a warning that something might be disturbing is a politeness? You actually want to do it to take care of the people in your classes and so forth. But what we're talking about here is the bureaucratization of that politeness. It's the making of rules, and it's the and it's driving this sort of campus censorship that is so concerning in the US.
Well, I'm glad I asked. Stay with us. You're watching The Drum. Well, as North Queensland assesses the damage from Cyclone Debbie, southeast Queensland, from south of Gladstone all the way to the New South Wales border, is shut down with torrential rain and flooding in the cyclone's wake. Meanwhile, this morning, the Prime Minister and opposition leader took brief leave from the last parliamentary sitting day before the budget, and they flew into the affected area to offer support, which included a mateship moment of squeegeeing.
What I'd say to Australians, if you want to help in the medium to longer term, the Whitsunday region is a great place for a holiday. They will tidy this up. They will be back on their feet. And I think the best way the rest of Australians can help is perhaps when you're thinking about your next holiday, come to the Whitsunday region.
That's a great message, and we're going to provide some additional support.
So there was local MP George Christensen, who copped flack for taking the last flight out for Canberra just before the cyclone hit.
If I was in the electorate of Dawson like everyone else, I would be sitting in my home at the moment, staying safe, probably without power, without maybe a working phone, depending on where it was, and no contact with key ministers down here in Canberra.
Is that fair enough that he's copping flack for getting out before the cyclone hit and then coming back later on?
I think it's a stupid distraction. We need to be focusing on the work the emergency services are doing and the funding and the recovery effort. George Christensen, he was in Parliament, he was doing his job. It's a very tight Parliament. He needs to be there. He's gone straight back to his constituency when he can to help. He's coming back into Canberra. I think this is all fluff that's trying to create a story from nothing when we should be focusing on the people of Australia and Queensland who are struggling.
Chris Berg, your view?
100% agreement. But I will add, can you imagine anything less helpful than a grandstanding politician walking around trying to shake hands? I mean,
What's wrong with the squeegee mop though? That looked helpful.
Oh yeah, really, yeah. No, I mean, I was reminded of a story the other day. Kevin Rudd, helping in the 2011 floods,
yes.
he actually got an infection.
He did. He had to go to hospital.
Now, Kevin Rudd, I'm sure people love to see him help out, but it is not helpful for somebody to be trying to drag publicity along with them.
Jack, we've got a minute left. You're a local councillor on the Sutherland Shire Council. Would you get out of Dodge when the cyclone hit and come back? What does it matter? Or are they being a bit mean to George?
No, look, I think it's a bit tough on George. Like, there's not too much extra he could have done. He would have been hunkered down like anybody else. But when it comes to natural disasters and the like, you do want to get out there and help as soon as you can. And whilst for Malcolm and Bill, I think getting up there and getting back, like that was there to show support and show people they're there. But look, you get out there, thank the people who are doing the hard work, the RFS and the SES.
And then get out of the way. Well, that's it for The Drum. Thanks very much to the panel tonight, to David Roy, to Jack Boyd and Chris Berg, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Good night.